The winter of 1815 London arrived wrapped in silk and ice, the air thick with perfume, gossip, and candle smoke. Within the glittering ballroom of Lady Weatherby's estate, where chandeliers dripped gold and violins hummed like restrained longing, Lady Elara Pembroke stood on the edge of ruin without yet knowing it. Her gown, a whisper of lavender satin trimmed in white lace, shimmered with quiet hope. Tonight was to be her triumph, the evening the Duke of Ashbourne would announce their engagement. Every whisper, every stolen glance of the past months had led to this. But the room carried a different rhythm now, something colder. The Duke had arrived first, and London society already knew what she did not. He stood across the ballroom, tall and arresting, framed by candlelight that softened the hard planes of his face. Edmund Blackwell, 29, heir to one of England's oldest dukedoms, looked every inch the man poets tried to describe and failed. Yet beneath his polished composure there was unease, like a man waiting for a punishment he deserved. When his gaze met hers, it did not burn as it once had. It only flickered, then fell away. Lady Pembroke's heart stilled. The air felt heavier, her gloves tighter. She noticed how the crowd shifted subtly around him, not toward celebration but curiosity. A whisper passed from one powdered lady to another, so quick, so careful it almost sounded like wind. She heard fragments: misunderstanding, premature, ill-advised. Her breath caught, though she smiled still, the way women were taught to smile through pain. He approached her slowly, bowing with perfect decorum. His voice, deep and restrained, held none of the warmth she had once trusted. "My lady, you are radiant this evening." "And you," she replied softly, "seem burdened by something heavier than the evening air." He hesitated, gloved hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tightening just enough to betray discomfort. Around them, the waltz continued, but their world had narrowed to a silence that felt like confession. "Elara," he murmured, eyes searching hers. "There are matters which require clarity before misunderstanding gives rise to harm." Her stomach turned cold. In that instant she knew. He would not speak of marriage tonight. He would speak of its undoing. She wished he had written instead. Words hurt less when they arrived on paper. But now, here, beneath chandeliers and watching eyes, he was about to strip her of every delicate illusion she had nurtured. He drew a shallow breath. "Our understanding, though deeply valued, cannot continue." The violins swelled just then, almost mercifully drowning her silence. She smiled faintly, the expression of a woman stabbed through silk. "I see," she said after a moment, though she did not. "And this understanding, was it yours alone or shared?" His throat worked, but he did not answer. His eyes, once tender, now held only apology, a weak currency against humiliation. Somewhere behind her, a lady gasped quietly. A gentleman's fan stilled. The air shifted again. It was done. The Duke of Ashbourne had cast her aside before the entire ton. Her breath came slow, controlled. She would not weep here. She curtsied with the grace of a woman twice her strength. "Then I wish your grace every happiness," she said evenly, though her heart was tearing. "And may your clarity bring you peace." He reached slightly, perhaps intending to stop her, but she turned away, her skirts brushing like whispers of finality. The ballroom blurred into color and sound. 1,000 eyes followed her retreat, their pity sharp as knives. In the corridor, the air was colder, honest. She pressed one gloved hand against her chest, feeling her pulse pound beneath bone and silk. Her maid appeared, startled, but Elara lifted a hand. "The carriage," she said faintly. "Now." Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft, unassuming flakes that vanished the moment they touched warmth. She stepped into the carriage, spine straight, face pale but unbroken. As the wheels turned, she looked once toward the great windows of the ballroom. Through them she saw him, a solitary figure against the golden blur of dancers, standing utterly still. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the frost-bitten glass. She did not flinch. Then she drew the curtain closed. Inside, silence wrapped around her like a shroud. The rhythm of hooves against cobblestone was steady, almost soothing. She thought of his hand once tracing hers, the way he had whispered her name like a promise. She had believed him honest, believed love was something noble. Now she understood that love, among the titled, was only a word used to mask transactions of power. She leaned back, tears threatening but unshed. Her mother's voice echoed faintly from childhood lessons: never beg for affection, never lower your gaze. Dignity, her mother had said, is the armor they cannot strip. So she wore it now, tightly, until it hurt to breathe. At the Pembroke townhouse, the fire had long gone out. The servants stirred in surprise at her early return, but she brushed past them wordlessly and entered her room. She did not call for help as she untied her gown. She did not light the lamp. In the darkness she found the letter she had written him days ago, full of dreams and gratitude, and held it by the dying firelight. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "For nothing." Then she sealed it again, pressed the wax, and sent it to his residence at dawn. It would be her farewell, dignified and final. By afternoon, a footman placed it on the Duke's desk in Ashbourne House. Edmund stared at it for a long while, the wax glinting faintly under grey light. He did not open it. Instead, he carried it to the hearth and fed it to the flames. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. He watched until there was nothing left, no smoke, no trace, only the faint scent of burned wax and something he refused to name. That night, the Duke attended a meeting with his solicitor regarding his father's debts and the estate's precarious accounts. He spoke mechanically, nodding through each calculation, though his mind replayed the look in Alara's eyes, a quiet disbelief, sharper than accusation. Pride was a cruel master, and he its obedient servant. In her own quiet room, Alara sat by the frost-glazed window, her breath fogging the glass. Snow kept falling, each flake dissolving into nothing. She pressed her fingers to the cold pane and made a vow, not aloud but deep within. She would never again allow her worth to depend upon the mercy of a man. For the rest of that season, society spoke of her tragedy in hushed tones. Some pitied her, some sneered. But as winter thawed and gossip moved on, Lady Alara Pembroke disappeared from London entirely. And when spring arrived, the Duke of Ashbourne found himself walking through rooms that smelled faintly of roses and regret, wondering, though he would never admit it, why silence could feel louder than love itself. The spring of 1817 brought London back to life in a rush of carriages, waltzes, and whispered wagers about whose name would next glitter in the society pages. After 2 long years of absence, Lady Alara Pembroke returned, not as the fragile girl who had vanished beneath scandal, but as something rarer. The city, always hungry for reinvention, greeted her return with fascination. She was now the ward of Baroness Amélie Duval, a French aristocrat whose exile from Paris carried an air of intrigue. In her company, Alara had learned the art of silence turned into power, the mastery of composure that could silence a room. When she entered the season's first soirée, every fan stilled, every monocle rose, every whisper found new purpose. Her beauty had not changed, but her bearing had. The soft, uncertain girl of lavender gowns was gone. In her place stood a woman of quiet grace, wearing pale blue silk that shimmered like moonlight and a sapphire brooch that caught every flicker of candlelight. She spoke little, listened much, and smiled only when it served her. It was this restraint, this self-command, that unnerved those who had once pitied her. The tongue did not know what to make of a woman who had been wounded and yet returned unbroken. When the Duke of Ashbourne first saw her again, it was almost by accident. He had come late to Lord Hatherfield's ball, weary of the endless chatter of politics and the subtle pursuit of marriageable heiresses. His life had grown efficient, lonely, shaped by the duty of managing the estate his father's debts had nearly ruined. He did not expect to see her standing beneath the great chandelier, her head tilted slightly as if listening to some music only she could hear. The sight halted him where he stood. Time, that merciless sculptor, had not diminished her, it had refined her. He watched her from across the room, the light from 1,000 candles reflected in her eyes, and something inside him shifted with quiet violence. Conversation around him blurred into meaningless sound. It was as though the world itself paused to watch what he had lost. The crowd parted slightly as she turned, and their eyes met. The music continued, but every note seemed distant, irrelevant. Her expression was calm, unreadable, but there was a flicker in her gaze, recognition without invitation. She inclined her head in polite acknowledgement, as if greeting an acquaintance from another life. He had been braced for anger or pain or even disdain, but her indifference struck harder. He crossed the room before he realized he was moving. "Lady Pembroke," he said softly, bowing with habitual precision. "It has been some time." She regarded him coolly. "Indeed, Your Grace. Time has proven most generous with us both." Her voice was steady, clear, touched with a French inflection that had not been there before. It unsettled him, this subtle foreignness. Around them, conversation began to hum again, people sensing, as creatures of gossip always did, that something long buried had resurfaced. "I trust you have been well," he managed. "Well enough to return," she replied. "And you? London must miss the sound of your certainty." He could not help the faint smile that escaped him, a ghost of old affection. "I see you have learned wit among your new company." "I have learned many things," she said, her gaze glancing briefly toward Baroness Duval across the room. "The chief among them being that silence is the finest teacher." He wished, absurdly, to apologize, to say everything he had swallowed 2 years ago when pride ruled him. But this was not the place. "Might I request a dance later this evening?" Her lips curved slightly. "You may request it, Your Grace. Whether I accept is another matter." Before he could answer, she moved past him with the ease of water slipping around stone, leaving him standing among murmuring voices and the faint scent of rose powder. Later, as the orchestra began another waltz, his chance came. The crowd pressed them together once more, and this time she did not refuse. Her hand in his felt both familiar and foreign, lighter, perhaps, or less trusting. They moved in rhythm beneath the golden light, their conversation as measured as their steps. "You keep a remarkable composure," he said quietly. "I remember a time when you spoke freely." "I remember a time when I was allowed to," she returned, her tone delicate but edged. "You taught me how swiftly words may be turned into weapons." His jaw tightened. "I did what was necessary. You know the circumstances." "Necessary?" she echoed softly. "What a gentle word for cruelty." He faltered in his step, but she did not. Her grace never wavered. When the music ended, she withdrew her hand before he could speak further. The audience of nobles applauded. They had witnessed not a dance, but a duel fought in perfect form. She turned to leave, but something small slipped from her wrist as she did, a silver locket, delicate, worn with time. The Duke stooped instinctively to retrieve it. The sight froze him. It was his mother's locket, the very one he had once given Alara as a promise, engraved with a single word, always. He looked up, astonished, the locket resting in his palm. "You kept it," he murmured, though the words were meant only for himself. Her expression did not change. "You mistake me, Your Grace," she said, taking it back with gloved fingers. "Some things survive not because we cherish them, but because they refuse to burn." Then she walked away, the locket glinting briefly before vanishing into the folds of her gown. He remained motionless, caught between admiration and remorse. All evening, talk spread like wildfire. How the Duke of Ashbourne had danced with the woman he once ruined. How she had returned, more admired than ever. How she might be courted now by a diplomat from Vienna, or perhaps even by Lord Hatherfield himself. London loved its spectacles, and this one promised a season of whispers. In the carriage home, Edmund sat in silence, the memory of her voice echoing with every rattle of the wheels. He had spent 2 years convincing himself he was right, that duty excused betrayal. Yet tonight, her calm had undone him more completely than tears ever could. Across the city, in the guest chamber of Baroness Duval's townhouse, Elara unpinned the sapphire brooch and placed it on the dressing table beside the locket. She opened it once, briefly, to reveal the miniature portrait within, his mother's serene face, painted years ago. Her reflection appeared beside it in the mirror, and for a moment she did not know which of them looked more composed. She closed the locket gently. Whatever she felt, she locked away again, as she had learned to do. The world had changed her, pain had taught her discipline, and yet, somewhere deep beneath that practiced calm, a single thought stirred, a quiet, dangerous curiosity about whether regret could ever be sincere. She extinguished the candle and drew the curtains, leaving only the pale wash of moonlight over the silk folds of her gown. Outside, the city pulsed with life, gossip, and the slow turning of fate. And in that silence before sleep, she whispered to herself, not with bitterness but certainty, "He will try again." And she knew she would let him, just enough to see if time had made a better man of him than pride ever could. The days that followed became a quiet storm neither of them could ignore. London, with its lace-curtained drawing-rooms and endless appetite for rumor, had already seized upon the story. Wherever Lady Elara went, the opera, the promenade, the charity luncheon, eyes followed and whispers bloomed. The Duke of Ashbourne's name was always the echo that trailed her. It was as though the city itself conspired to weave their names together once more, just to see which would fall first. Edmund bore it in silence, though every murmur felt like penance. He had been a man of power once, admired, envied, obeyed. But now, in every glance, he felt judged. His peers congratulated him with smirking irony, as though reclaiming the woman he had wronged were a sport, not a confession. Yet he did not pursue her out of vanity. Something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more desperate had taken hold, the need to prove, perhaps to himself as much as to her, that redemption was not beyond reach. Elara, meanwhile, had mastered the art of composure to a degree that made her untouchable. Beneath the soft light of candlelit salons, she conversed with politicians and poets alike, smiling without yielding, listening without promising. To the world, she was a woman perfectly content, her dignity restored by distance and refinement. But alone, in the quiet of her chamber, she felt the dull ache of unfinished history. It was not love she feared, it was recognition. To see him again was to feel time folding in on itself, reopening wounds she had spent 2 years closing. It was the Baroness who forced their paths to cross once more. "He seeks to make amends," Amelie said one evening, while fastening a pearl clasp around Elara's neck. "A man of his rank cannot live long in the shadow of disgrace. Perhaps you might allow him to beg properly before you condemn him again." Elara met her guardian's reflection in the mirror. "You speak as though forgiveness were a performance." "Everything is, ma chère," Amelie replied. "Especially among those who pretend it is not." So it was decided, reluctantly, quietly, that she would attend the charity auction hosted by the Duke of Ashbourne at his London residence. It was a public affair, one meant to display benevolence rather than intimacy, yet it was precisely in such controlled spaces that emotions most often betrayed their masks. When her carriage arrived before the Duke's townhouse, the night air was thick with expectation. Lanterns gleamed like captured stars, and the rhythmic clatter of hooves echoed against the cobblestones. She stepped out gracefully, aware of the attention her entrance commanded. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold and ivory, every inch designed to impress without warmth. Edmund greeted each guest with a diplomat's courtesy, yet when he saw her, when her gloved hand touched the marble balustrade, his composure faltered. "Lady Pembroke," he said, bowing deeply, "your presence honors the cause." She inclined her head. "One must always support good causes, Your Grace. Charity is, after all, society's finest disguise for curiosity." His lips twitched at that, half amusement, half ache. "I had hoped it might serve as redemption." "Redemption is not sold so cheaply," she replied, her tone even, though her pulse betrayed her. The evening unfolded with practiced civility. Paintings, jewels, and fine silks were auctioned for the benefit of widows and veterans, though everyone knew the true spectacle was the unspoken war between the host and his most unwilling guest. Each time she laughed, his gaze sought her out, hungry and uncertain. Each time he approached, she slipped away, smiling to another gentleman or pausing at a painting to avoid him. When at last she found herself alone in the gallery adjoining the ballroom, he followed. The air was cooler there, the hush almost sacred. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, stern-faced dukes and delicate ladies staring down from centuries past. "You still avoid me," he said softly, stepping closer. "I prefer to remember you from a distance," she replied without turning. "Yet you came." "I came because the Baroness insisted." She faced him now, her expression unreadable. "Do not mistake attendance for forgiveness." "I do not ask for forgiveness," he said. "Only the chance to speak truthfully, something I failed to do before." Her eyes narrowed. "And what truth eluded you, Your Grace? That ambition is worth more than affection? That a title requires a sacrifice, preferably someone else's heart?" He winced, the words striking clean. "You think I do not carry that with me? Every day since I left you, I have known the weight of my choice. My title survived, yes, but I did not." For a long moment she said nothing. The silence stretched between them like glass, fragile, dangerous. Then she spoke, quieter. "You had the power to destroy me, and you did. But you also taught me something invaluable." "What was that?" "That love without courage is only vanity." The words landed like a verdict. He stepped back slightly, his breath unsteady. She turned to leave, but he reached into his coat and produced something small, a folded sheet of aged parchment. "This was never sent," he said, holding it out. "A letter written the night I ended it. I burned all but one copy. I do not know why I kept it." She hesitated before taking it. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Unfolding it, she read silently. "If I could defy the world, I would choose you still. But the world is cruel, and I am its coward." Her eyes flicked up to him, luminous with something between sorrow and disbelief. "You would give this to me now?" "I would give you everything I withheld, if it meant you could believe I once loved you honestly." She exhaled softly, her hand trembling as she folded the letter again. "Honesty, Your Grace, is not the same as bravery." And with that, she placed the letter on the nearest table and turned toward the open archway. But before she could leave, the Baroness appeared at the doorway, her face pale, a folded note clutched in her hand. "Ilara," she said, breathless, "you must come at once. There has been an incident. Your guardian in France, Monsieur Duval, has been arrested. Political charges." Ilara froze, the shock cutting through her poise like a blade. The Duke stepped forward instinctively, concern eclipsing everything else. "What do you mean?" she demanded, taking the paper. "The French embassy confirmed it moments ago," Amélie said. "They mean to detain him indefinitely unless," she hesitated, "unless certain debts are paid." Ilara's hands tightened around the note. The world that had seemed so orderly moments ago now swayed beneath her feet. "Debts?" the Duke asked. "How much?" "Enough to ruin anyone without influence," Amélie whispered. Ilara looked at him then, truly looked. The anger that had shielded her heart wavered, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. "I will not let you face this alone," he said quietly, with a conviction that startled even him. Her reply came slowly, wary yet trembling with something dangerously close to belief. "Then prove it, Edmund. Not with words, but with what the world respects most, action." The candlelight flickered as if listening. And in that stillness, as the murmur of the ballroom continued beyond the walls, both of them knew that the reckoning between them had only just begun. The dawn that followed was gray and uncertain, as though London itself hesitated to open its eyes upon the choices that would soon unfold. The Duke of Ashbourne had not slept. The letter lay unfolded on his desk, its ink smudged by the restless pressure of his fingertips. He had read it countless times, the account of Monsieur Duval's imprisonment, the exorbitant ransom demanded, the veiled implication that no lawful means could secure his release. Politics had teeth, and in 1817 they bit hardest upon the powerless. Yet Edmund had power still, perhaps too much of it, and for the first time in years, he felt the stirring of purpose that was not pride but penance. By noon, he was already in motion. The servants whispered of his sudden urgency, the footmen carried sealed letters to the Foreign Office, and the stables thundered with hooves bound for Parliament. It was said that when the Duke wished for something, the city bent, but this was no simple favor to be purchased with charm or lineage. It was a battle of influence and reputation, and his had been tarnished by scandal and retreat. He knew well the irony, to save the man who had sheltered the woman he wronged. Yet in that irony lay his redemption, and he embraced it with a fever that startled even himself. Hilaire, meanwhile, sat by the fire in Baroness Amelie's drawing-room, the letter of Duval's imprisonment opened before her like a wound that would not close. The words blurred as she read them over and over, her composure fraying. She had never been powerless before, not even in heartbreak, but now she felt the old fear return, the fear of being at the mercy of men and their decisions. Amelie poured her tea with steady hands, though her eyes betrayed the same dread. "London cannot save him," Amelie said softly. "You know how they treat foreigners who speak too freely. He was reckless, yes, but kind. They will not forgive either." Hilaire's voice was a whisper. "There must be someone, some connection." "There is one," came the Baroness's reply, though she did not meet Hilaire's gaze. "The Duke. His family has ties deep in the government and in France as well. He could intervene, but it would come at a cost." Hilaire closed her eyes, remembering the look on Edmund's face when he said, "I will not let you face this alone." She had dismissed it as sentiment, yet even now a small, unwelcome flame of hope stirred within her. Hours passed before she saw him again. The drawing-room was quiet when the footman announced his arrival, his voice wavering slightly under the weight of the name. Edmund entered without ceremony, his expression grave but resolute. He bowed to Amelie, then turned to Hilaire, his eyes finding hers as if the rest of the room had vanished. "I have spoken with those who can act," he said. "The matter is complicated but not impossible." Hilaire rose, her heartbeat quickening. "Tell me what must be done." "There are debts, political ones," he continued. "Your guardian's arrest is not merely personal but strategic. The French intend to make an example of him. But if we can arrange for his debts to be absorbed and his silence guaranteed, they will release him quietly." Amelie frowned. "Absorbed? You mean purchased?" He nodded once. "Yes. It will take a fortune." "And you would pay it?" Hilaire asked, disbelief softening into confusion. "I will," he said simply. "But there is more. The negotiations must appear legitimate. The payment must come through a family connection, one with the authority to stand before both courts. That means my family name will be bound to yours." The silence that followed was thick as velvet. Amelie looked away, understanding what he had not yet spoken. In plain words, Hilaire said, her voice steady but pale, "You would restore my reputation by binding it to yours." "Yes," he said. "Through marriage." Her breath caught, not from shock but from the cruel symmetry of it. The same man who had destroyed her standing now offered to repair it by reclaiming her under his title. It was both salvation and punishment. "Do not mistake me," he said quickly, stepping closer. "I do not ask this to erase my guilt. I ask because it is the only way to save him, and perhaps to save what little of myself remains honorable." She looked up at him then, her eyes searching for the arrogance that once defined him. But it was gone. In its place was something raw, human, and terribly sincere. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then I will still pay the debt," he answered. "But the papers will name me alone, and tongues will twist the story." They will say I purchased your guardian's freedom to win you back. Your name will suffer again. The cruelty of truth struck her harder than any plea could have. He was right. Society thrived on scandal, and it would feast upon this. She turned to the window, the pale winter light painting her in silver. 2 years ago, she said softly, you chose duty over love. Now you ask me to choose love disguised as duty. I ask you to choose justice, he said, his voice breaking slightly. For him, for yourself, and for the part of me that failed you. Amelie rose quietly. I will leave you both, she murmured, slipping away before either could stop her. When the door closed, Elara and Edmund stood alone in the hush. The air between them pulsed with old memory. Finally she spoke. You believe in redemption, then? I believe in consequence, he said. And in what a man becomes when he faces it. She turned slowly, her eyes glistening. Then let us face it together. The words fell softly, almost reluctantly, yet they changed everything. 3 days later, discreet announcements circulated among London's elite. The Duke of Ashbourne was to wed Lady Elara Pembroke in a ceremony attended only by a few witnesses. The Ton reacted with predictable hysteria, half scandalized, half entranced. Some called it a love story reborn, others a transaction wrapped in lace. But for Edmund and Elara, the union was neither spectacle nor salvation. It was a covenant forged from ashes. The ceremony took place in the small chapel of St. Bartholomew's, beneath an overcast sky. She wore no jewels, only a gown of ivory silk, simple but radiant. When he took her hand, there was no tremor, no hesitation. For the first time, they stood as equals, wounded, weary, but willing. When the vows were spoken and the rings exchanged, he leaned close enough that only she could hear him. If I could undo the past, I would, he whispered. But if this is the price for my sins, I will pay it gladly. Her gaze softened, though her reply was measured. Then let us see if love can survive duty this time. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, silent as forgiveness. Yet even as they left the chapel arm in arm, a shadow trailed them, the knowledge that promises made under pressure rarely rest easy. That night, as the carriages rolled toward Ashbourne House, the Duke glanced at the horizon, his jaw set. He had won her hand, perhaps even her trust. But her heart, that, he feared, would be the final battle. The winter of their union arrived like a hush before confession, the kind that weighed upon every hearth and hallway of Ashbourne House. Snow lay thick upon the grounds, muting the world beyond the high iron gates. Within, candles flickered against cold marble, and the echoes of servants' footsteps sounded distant, reverent, as though even they understood the fragility of peace beneath that roof. The Duke and Duchess lived not as strangers, yet not entirely as lovers. Their words were careful, their gestures measured, and though they dined together nightly, silence remained their truest companion. Elara often wandered the conservatory after dusk, her hands brushing the frost-kissed glass as if searching for warmth beyond it. The roses that had once filled her evenings with color were now pale ghosts of themselves, pressed between the glass panes like trapped sighs. Edmund would find her there sometimes, and though he longed to speak, he rarely did. His gaze would linger upon her reflection, soft, distant, unknowable, until the ache in his chest grew unbearable. He had gained everything that mattered, and yet carried the weight of all he had broken. Their marriage had indeed freed Monsieur Duval. His release came quietly, negotiated through coin, diplomacy, and pride. The man himself wrote a letter of gratitude, promising to remain abroad for safety's sake. Yet gratitude could not erase what had been done to secure it, nor could it heal what lay unspoken between the two who had paid the price. The Ton, ever watchful, had grown restless. They whispered that the Duchess was aloof, that the Duke seemed haunted, that theirs was not a union of passion but penance. Elara had ceased to care what they thought, but Edmund did. He feared that their silence would one day become truth. One evening, when the snow had ceased and the city lanterns glowed like dying stars, a messenger arrived bearing an invitation sealed with the crest of the crown. The Duke was summoned to attend a royal gathering, a masquerade at Carlton House. It was not a request but a command. The court wished to restore his standing formally, to remind England that the Duke of Ashbourne was once again in royal favor. He accepted, though his heart hesitated. He turned to Alara that night, the firelight soft upon her profile. "The world will watch us," he said. "They will expect affection, perfection. Will you endure it?" She did not look up from the embroidery in her lap. "I have endured worse," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "But if we must face them, let us do it together, truthfully this time." The night of the masquerade arrived with a chill that crept even through silk and velvet. The ballroom shimmered beneath chandeliers, masks glittering like secrets waiting to be told. Music drifted through the air, elegant and measured, the language of restraint. Edmund entered first, tall and commanding, his black mask trimmed in gold. When Alara appeared moments later, every murmur ceased. Her gown was ivory threaded with silver, her mask a delicate lattice of lace and pearls. She moved like a memory reclaimed, no longer the girl betrayed, nor the woman scorned, but something luminous, untouchable. All eyes turned as they crossed the floor together, husband and wife. And in that moment the whispers of 2 years ago, the heartbreak, the scandal, fell away like dust shaken from an old tapestry. Yet beneath the composure tension rippled. A gentleman approached Alara, bowing low, his tone dripping with mock courtesy. "Your Grace," he said, his voice low enough for only them to hear. "Rumor has it the Duke found virtue more costly than affection. Tell me, does loyalty taste as bitter as betrayal?" Alara froze, her hand tightening on Edmund's arm. The insult was deliberate, a test. Edmund's jaw clenched, and for the briefest instant, the room seemed to hold its breath. He turned to the man, his voice quiet but cutting. "Only those who have never known love mistake its cost," he said. "Now begone, before I remind you that nobility is more than birthright." The man paled and retreated, and the murmur of music resumed. Alara exhaled, her eyes meeting Edmund's in silent gratitude. Something shifted then, something small but irrevocable. For the first time since their vows she saw not the Duke, but the man beneath, flawed, protective, willing to burn his dignity for her sake. They danced. Slowly at first, then with growing ease, the way one learns to trust again through motion, not words. Around them, the world blurred into color and candlelight, and as they turned beneath the chandeliers, she whispered, "Why do you still fight for me, when I have given you nothing?" He leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "Because I once mistook your silence for forgiveness. Now I see it was courage." Her gaze softened, but before she could answer, a sudden commotion broke through the music. A servant hurried to the Duke, bowing low, whispering urgently. Edmund's expression darkened. "A fire," the servant said. "At Ashbourne House." The crowd gasped. Without hesitation, Edmund took Alara's hand and led her out. Carriages clattered through icy streets as smoke painted the night sky. When they arrived, flames licked the upper floors, devouring tapestries and portrait. Servants rushed with buckets, their faces streaked with soot. Alara's chest tightened. Among the smoke, she recognized the conservatory's silhouette. The roses, the letters, the fragments of her old life, all burning. Edmund moved to rush inside, but she caught his arm. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "It's only things, Edmund. Let them go." He looked at her, and in that instant, something within him broke free. "I can't let it take what you built," he said. "You brought light into these halls again. I won't lose that." He tore from her grasp and disappeared into the smoke. Minutes stretched like hours until, through the haze, he emerged, soot-covered, coughing, but alive, a single scorched object clutched in his hand. It was the small pressed rose she had once kept in her journal, the one she thought long lost. He placed it in her palm, his voice hoarse. "It survived," he said simply. Tears blurred her vision. "So did we." The fire was quenched before dawn, leaving the house wounded but standing. When the first light broke through the smoke, Ilara stood beside Edmund on the terrace, wrapped in his coat. The air smelled of ash and thawing snow. He turned to her quietly. "2 years ago I let pride destroy us," he said. "Tonight I would have burned the world to keep you safe. I can't change what I was, Ilara, but I can choose what I become, if you'll let me." She studied him, this man who had once been all arrogance and armor, now humbled by love and loss. "Then become the man who no longer fears love," she whispered. He took her hand, kissed it gently, and for the first time she did not pull away. As dawn spread across the sky, soft and forgiving, the ashes of their past mingled with snow. The world, for once, seemed silent, not in judgment but in reverence. The Duke of Ashbourne and his Duchess stood as living proof that even in a world ruled by duty and ruin, love, true love, could rise again, fragile yet unyielding, from the embers.